Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the wild, centuries-long evolution of literature's most famous wizard. When you picture a wizard, you're probably imagining a wise, bearded figure dispensing cryptic advice and pulling off miraculous feats, right? But the foundational model for every modern magical mentor didn't start out that way at all. The real story of Merlin is this incredibly fascinating tangled web of Celtic mythology, political propaganda, and medieval theology. To untangle all this mythology, we're going to follow 5 main chapters. First up, the Wild Man of Wales. Then, the Ultimate Wizard Rebrand. Third, we'll look at the Mechanics of Magic, followed by Architect of Camelot, and finally, the Wizard's Tragic Downfall. Let's get to it. Chapter 1. The Wild Man of Wales. We're starting our journey with his origins in 6th century post-Roman Britain. Now, to really set the stage, we have to travel back to a pretty dark and violent era. Post-Roman Celtic kingdoms were desperately struggling against Saxon expansion, and there was just constant internal warfare. And as you can see, this is a massive literary journey. We're tracking this from the 6th century all the way up to the 13th century French Vulgate cycle. It literally took over 600 years for the character we recognize today to fully materialize, constantly adapting to whatever the political and cultural needs of the time were. So the historical blueprint actually begins with a man named Myrddin Wyllt, which translates to Merlin in the Wild. He was a warrior who was driven completely out of his mind by the catastrophic losses at the Battle of Arthurian back in 573 AD. Fleeing the sheer trauma of warfare, he ran off to the Caledonian forest. And out there, he lived as a total hermit, wearing unkempt animal skins and talking to stags and ravens like they were his closest confidants. But here's the thing. In Celtic tradition, this madness wasn't just seen as an illness. It actually granted him profound supernatural insight. The forest essentially became a liminal space, a mysterious threshold where the strict boundaries between the natural world and the supernatural grew incredibly thin. Chapter 2. The Ultimate Wizard Rebrand, brought to us by Geoffrey of Monmouth's 12th century PR spin. Let's jump ahead to 1138 and look at how this wild folklore got a massive promotion by an ambitious writer named Geoffrey of Monmouth. He needed a central figure to tie together a sprawling history of Britain. The contrast is just stark. Geoffrey completely reimagined our naked hermit into a sophisticated courtly advisor who could orchestrate whole empires. He even Latinized the name to Merlinus. Why? Well, because the Welsh name Myrddinus sounded way too much like a certain French profanity for feces. Seriously, it was a totally vital PR move so Merlin could actually enter high society without being laughed straight out of the room. To cement this new status, Geoffrey wrote an incredible scene where a young Merlin is brought before King Vortigern. The king is desperately trying to build a tower, but the walls mysteriously collapsed every single night. Merlin steps up and reveals the hidden cause, an underground lake with 2 battling dragons. He makes this bold prophecy about an eternal combat between the native Britons, the red dragon, and the invading Saxons, the white dragon. This absolutely established Merlin's new credibility. He wasn't just some mad fortune teller in the woods anymore. He was a powerful divine seer. Moving on to Chapter 3, the Mechanics of Magic, and the duality of his demonic roots and holy purpose. Now, back in the medieval era, you couldn't just have a super powerful sorcerer without bringing theology into it. You really have to understand how he performed this magic. So, according to the legend, Merlin was the son of a devout human nun and an incubus, which is essentially a demon specializing in deception. He inherited all this infernal, cosmic knowledge from his demon father. But, and here's the brilliant medieval theological loophole, that potential for evil was immediately neutralized by a holy baptism. So he got to keep all those dark cosmic cheat codes, but he was bound by a human moral compass to serve a divine purpose. This duality really defines the true nature of his power. Unlike those fraudulent court sorcerers who relied on cheap illusions, Merlin's abilities were basically highly advanced natural philosophy. He wasn't breaking the laws of physics, he just understood them way better than anyone else. I mean, we're talking about a guy who could summon storms by sensing atmospheric shifts, move the massive stones of Stonehenge by understanding the hidden properties of matter, and directly manipulate elemental energies. He was effectively a master scientist living in an age of superstition. Chapter 4, Architect of Camelot, and Forging an Empire Through Magic and Statecraft. As Merlin grows older, he shifts from a visionary prophet into a strategic, active kingmaker. He basically realizes that just predicting the future isn't enough. He has to actively forge it. And he does this by pulling off an absolute masterpiece of deception, a magical heist at Tintagel Castle. King Uther Pendragon was dangerously obsessed with Ygritte, the wife of his rival, the Duke of Cornwall. So Merlin uses his deep knowledge of statecraft and magic to transform Uther entirely, face, voice, memories, the whole shebang, so he can slip right into this impregnable castle. Merlin times it perfectly, so King Arthur is conceived at the exact moment the real dupe is killed in battle elsewhere. It's a ruthless, perfectly orchestrated maneuver to secure a unified bloodline.
But Merlin's magic didn't stop at political schemes. It actually extended right into architecture. He didn't just put King Arthur on the throne, he built the physical and moral infrastructure of Camelot. He carved the famous round table from a single sacred oak, embedding these moral enchantments right into the wood itself. It functioned like a magical focal point that would physically grow warm under the hands of honest knights, and because it was a circle, it completely eliminated destructive social hierarchy. He was literally enchanting a chivalric society into existence.
Which brings us to our final act. Chapter 5, The Wizard's Tragic Downfall, The Fatal Blindness of the Prophet. It presents a fascinating puzzle, right? How exactly do you trap an all-knowing immortal wizard? I mean, how does a guy who can see the fall of empires and orchestrate the destinies of kings totally fail to see his own impending doom? Well, the medieval authors answered this by showing us that even the greatest supernatural wisdom is completely blinded by romantic passion. Blinded by an overwhelming passion for his brilliant young student, Nimue, the Lady of the Lake, Merlin decided to teach her his exact curriculum of magical arts. He walked her through elemental manipulation, deep prophetic meditation, and, most dangerously, complex binding spells. He completely ignored his own prophetic warnings and just handed over the deadliest secrets of his craft to someone whose loyalty was, quite frankly, entirely uncertain. And this blind trust builds up to a totally devastating climax. In a moment of supreme dramatic irony, Nimue used the very binding spells he taught her to imprison him forever. Depending on the version of the legend you read, he gets locked away in a crystal cave or a liminal hawthorn tree. The craziest part? Merlin actually recognized his own magical formulas being turned against him, but his emotional attachment was just so strong that he couldn't or wouldn't stop her. His imprisonment completely neutralized the kingdom's greatest protector, leaving Camelot vulnerable to its ultimate, inevitable destruction. So why does all this matter to us today? Well, because the modern wizard archetype we all know and absolutely love, the Gandalfs and the Dumbledores of the world, is fundamentally just a polished remix of this deeply flawed medieval character. The entire template of the wise, magical mentor balancing vast natural philosophy with a heavy moral burden, that was forged centuries ago, all from the scattered tales of a traumatized Welsh hermit.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final thought to chew on. If the greatest prophet in literature could foresee the destiny of nations, yet was entirely blind to his own ruin, what does that tell us about the ultimate limits of human wisdom? Thanks for joining me, and keep questioning the stories you think you know.